Although very little of the Etruscans' houses, defensive walls, and temples have survived, we know a fair bit about them from their tombs. Thousands of tombs have survived the millennia, many elaborately decorated and containing beautiful grave goods. But in this video, I'm discussing something else that they left behind, something less well known than their enormous burial mounds. I'm talking about Vie Cave, which in English roughly translates as hollowed out roads. Sound a bit boring? Well, they're not. They are fascinating. And if you don't believe me, stay with this video a little bit longer to see what I mean. In the mountainous Maremma region of Tuscany lies the three picturesque modern towns of Sovana, Sorano and Pitigliano. They are more than 300 meters above sea level and are to the west of the Bolsena Lake, the largest volcanic lake in Europe. All three of these towns were inhabited by the Etruscans, but the vast majority of the buildings that can be seen in them today date to the Middle Ages or the Renaissance period. However, aside from the Vie Cave, which I'm going to talk about in this video, there are a few other structures that hint at an Etruscan origin, apart from, of course, several extensive necropolises in the area. In Sovana, the 16th century castle known as the Rocca Aldobrandesca, named for the family that built it, was likely constructed over the site of an Etruscan or Roman fortress, but nothing of this remains. However, Sovana's cathedral does have something in its crypt that points towards the Etruscans. The cathedral mostly dates to the 11th and 12th centuries, but was constructed over the site of an 8th century church, some of which remains in its crypt and also as a decorated portal. Next to this portal, there is the relief of a two-tailed siren, which is apparently remarkably similar to imagery found at the nearby Etruscan necropolis. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of this relief anywhere. I'll just have to go there. The Etruscan necropolis of Sovana is a few kilometers from the town and has many rock-cut tombs dating to between the 7th and 2nd centuries BCE. Its Ildebranda tomb is shaped like a temple with a double staircase and pillars decorated with floral and zoomorphic motifs. As I've mentioned in previous videos, most of what we know about the Etruscans, including how their houses and temples looked, comes from their tombs, which were carved and decorated to resemble these places of the living. The tomb of the siren is decorated in high relief with a mermaid who has two tails and is flanked by two guards, and it's this motif that's similar to the one in the cathedral. This tomb also has lion statues on either side of it. Another famous tomb is the Polar tomb, which it's thought was a temple originally before being reused for burials. Close to Sorano, there is a rather intriguing cave settlement called Vitozza, which was built during the medieval period but may well have been inhabited much earlier by the Etruscans and the Romans. It's made up of more than 200 caves which have been excavated from the volcanic tuff stone characteristic of the area. The cave settlement was also supported by a castle, two fortresses and several churches. I'm mentioning this because although it's not certain that Vitozza was first inhabited in Etruscan times, it helps us to picture just how mountainous and rocky that region of Italy is, and that might explain the emergence of the Vie Cave. Close to Pitigliano, another interesting cave site is known as the Tempietto, or Small Cave in English. It's a natural cave that's been reworked and carved at some time in the past, but no one is quite sure when. It's commonly referred to as a small Paleo-Christian shrine, but it could have Etruscan origins. Close to Pitigliano is the Poggio Bucco necropolis, featuring many tombs, but also the remains of another Etruscan settlement. Parts of the original wall surrounding the town are still extant. So with that context in mind, let's take a look at the Vie Cave. Close to the ancient Etruscan centres, now known as Sovana, Sorano, and Pitigliano, the Etruscans went to a tremendous amount of effort to carve winding pathways through huge sections of solidified volcanic ash known as tuff. These sunken, narrow, dark pathways have sides that are several meters high, and in some places they measure as much as 30 meters in height. So once you're inside them, you can't see out of them. They make up a sort of damp labyrinth and are now largely covered in vegetation, giving them an even more eerie feel. Although they vary in width, they are mostly very narrow, so can only accommodate a person or a single animal or people walking in single file. There's only a few examples that would have been able to fit a cart. It's thought that the Etruscans created them by carving holes in the tuff, placing wood and water into these holes, and then leaving that wood to expand due to the effects of the water. This would then have broken the tuff. That said, if such a method was used, it would still have been a difficult project. Some of them have channels carved into either side which were likely to drain water from them during heavy rains. There are also steps carved into those on slopes. Interestingly, no one is quite sure what the Vie Cave were for. Of course, in such a mountainous region, it makes sense that they were carved as convenient pathways so that the Etruscans could easily maneuver between their settlements, necropolises, and the river. However, this purpose is slightly questionable because of how curvy and narrow they are. They aren't as practical as you would expect for such a use. It's also been suggested that they were used by the Etruscans as a hideout during times of conflict. They are certainly well hidden. Or that they were used to trick the enemy who could easily get trapped in them because once inside there was no way out without going all the way through. Of course, they could also have played a role in ritual with funerary processions or other ceremonies taking place in them. This is hinted at in frescoes found in some of the tombs. The biggest question is, why are they so deep? If they were purely for practical purposes to facilitate movement between the towns and necropolises, then they didn't need to be quite as deep and therefore as well hidden as they are. At the end of the 3rd century BCE, the Romans built the paved road known as the Via Claudia, using part of an existing Via Cava and connecting it to the other Via Cave. In this map, the Via Claudia is shown in pink, running from Rome to the important Etrurian town of Rucellai. Two other Roman roads running through Etruria at that time were the Via Aurelia, marked on the map in blue, and the Via Cassia, marked in red. In later times, they were reused and then Christianized, with carved crosses and shrines added to cavities along the way. The Via Cava di San Rocco, which connects Sorano to Sovana, was the only route between the two towns from the Middle Ages to the mid-20th century. So every person moving between the two towns had to use it, which opened up the demand for rest areas and food and drink supplies at various points along the way. The Vie Cave are not just between Sorano, Sovana, and Pitigliano. They can also be found near the Sutri necropolis to the south of Lake Bolsena and near Bomarzo to the southeast. Bomarzo, you may well have heard of, is mostly known for its Etruscan pyramid, thought to have been an altar, and a 16th century sculpture garden called the Sacro Bosco. Interestingly, there is a sort of equivalent to the Vie Cave in England that might help us to understand what they were for. They are located in the county of Dorset and a few other parts of southern England and are known as hollow ways. In fact, according to an article by the BBC, the last name Holloway likely was given to people who lived near these pathways. It's a surname with topographic origins. These sunken pathways are much lower than the surrounding land because they are located where soft bedrock was eroded away by the movement of people and animals over many years and the actions of rainfall. Since they tend to be between Iron Age Roman and Saxon settlements, they are likely pretty old. One of the most famous is Shoots Lane. Some people think that the Vie Cave were purposefully carved out of the tuff to facilitate the movement of people and animals between locations, but that they started off quite shallow. It was then these movements, plus the action of rainfall over many decades, that gradually wore them down. So what do you think the Vie Cave were for? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.